Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sławomir Dębski. I'm director of the Polish Institute of International Affairs, who actually, together with the Polish Economic Institute, on the commission of Reinhard Bütikofer, the leader of the Greens for European Parliament, prepared a special report on China and the European Union comprehensive agreement on investment that was concluded 20 December 2020. And it is intended to replace bilateral investment treaties between China and particular EU member states and to rebalance asymmetry in the EU-China economic relations. The EU and China have been in talks for 7 years trying to reach this agreement. The deal has yet to be signed, and the text of the agreement still needs the approval of the Council of the European Union and the European Parliament. The deal was concluded mainly due to the determination of the German government, which wanted to seal a diplomatic success while holding the presidency of the EU Council, and with clear political support from France. Germany was intended to keep economic opportunities with China open, while France sought to demonstrate the Union's growing political clout. Both countries are, of course, major European investors in China. But of course, the agreement is not only about trade, it is not only about investment agreement. It also plays a role. It's a contribution to the wider debate about the role of European Union, in intensifying rivalry between the United States and China. Quite recently, the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, openly said that in this context, she would prefer Europe to stay aside, to be neutral. The problem is that, and I'm speaking here as a representative of the region, of European region, which for a long time has been a quicksand of European politics and history, that being a buffer zone is not the most comfortable position you can ever think about. So the trouble is how Europe should think about itself in this context. And we were happy to being asked by Reinhard Bütikofer, the leader of Greens in the European Parliament, to think about this question, to study the agreement. And now we are in the position to present results of this research. We did it together with the Polish Economic Institute. We create a special task force combining expertise of those who know something about China, economists, lawyers, and all together they work quite hard to present today their conclusions. We are very happy of this cooperation. And now I would like to pass the floor to Damian Długowski, who was a member of our team, and he will present the results of our findings. Thank you very much once again, and I'm looking forward for very interesting, very important, and I believe stimulating discussion, contributing to our understanding where we are and whether this deal should be ratified by European Parliament or perhaps not. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Damian Długowski. I am the head of the Asia Pacific program in the Polish Institute of International Affairs. And as Director Dębski mentioned, I was one of the members of our task force for preparing the report on the comprehensive agreement on investment between the EU and China. I was one of the co-editors of this report. And I will share with you the presentation, my short presentation on this issue. This is the first page of our report. And as you see, and as Director Dembski mentioned, we prepared it with our colleagues from the Polish Economic Institute, and I would like to express my gratitude for their effort, engagement, and their contributions, especially to Marek Wąsiński, who was the second co-editor of this report. My presentation will be divided in 4 parts. In the first one, I will present the political implications of the conclusion of negotiations on the agreement, then the economic and legal issues, the selected issues, because there are a lot of them, and I encourage all of you to look at our website where the full report is presented and get some more insights on those issues. This third part will be about the effectiveness of KAI, potential effectiveness, which we see as the crucial element of the whole process, and at the end, some conclusions emerging from our report. When it comes to political implications, we have to take into account that since 2013, when the mandate for the negotiations of KAI was given to the European Commission, the political and economic environment in global stage, as well as China's foreign and internal policy, has changed significantly. Since 2013, we can say about the Xi Jinping's era in the Chinese policy, which is marked, for instance, by the more assertive, we can say, foreign policy regarding partners in the region, but also on the global scene, and also tightening the grip of the Chinese Communist Party in China. In 2019, given all those circumstances, the European Commission issued a very important document, which is called EU-China Strategic Outlook, where China was named or described in 3 dimensions as the strategic partner, which concerns, for instance, climate change and other global affairs, in which China is perceived as a partner for the EU, an economic competitor, and the systemic rival. The systemic rivalry refers mostly to the promotion by China of the different from the EU's model of governance and socio-economic development. In our perspective, KAI and the conclusion of the negotiations of KAI in December 2020 shows that the European Commission, the EU, gives a sign that it would like to focus more on the partnership or the competition rather than the systemic rivalry with China. Of course, this aspect will not disappear. We saw in March the exchange of the sanctions on the human rights issues, but it will be the pressure and the focus will be, in our opinion, mostly in a longer term put on the cooperation and eventually competition, not the rivalry. Conclusion of the negotiations at that time also undermines the EU credibility in terms of promoted values and the international the vision of international relations, which should be based on the international law. We have to take into account that during at least the last year, but also when we go back in time, also other issues emerged in the EU-China relations, but also in the China's internal policy, which should be taken into account during the negotiations on KAI. I'm talking about the imposing of the national security law in Hong Kong and the persecution of the democratic activists in the region, the situation in Xinjiang and the violations of the human rights, also the wolf warrior diplomacy and mass diplomacy of China during since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we see that there were a lot of issues which deteriorated the EU-China relations, although the EU decided to conclude these negotiations, which can be perceived, and such countries like India, for instance, perceived it as a promoting as a value promotion is less important than the economic gains, which can undermine the EU's position on the global stage. Saying that, the biggest blow because of the KAI negotiations conclusion was to the transatlantic relations. And the timing of the conclusion of the negotiations, 2 months, less than 2 months after the US presidential elections, in the wake of the Biden's administration inauguration, gives a signal that the EU is undermining the common position on China. Of course, it doesn't mean that this is the U-turn on the given the EU-US cooperation on China, but it undermines the trust between those partners in the beginning of the presidency of the new president, who underlined in the election campaign that he would like to strengthen the alliances and forge the common stance on global issues, including the rising power of China. In that sense, the conclusion of CAI negotiations can be perceived as the diplomatic success of China. And this flexibility of the EU, which was described and explained as looking for the strategic autonomy, could send a signal that the EU can be to some extent divided from the United States, and the allies of the United States can be brought closer to China at expense of the cooperation with the US. We saw that last year in November, when the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership was signed between the 15 countries of Asia Pacific region, and there were also the participation of Japan or South Korea, close US allies, who concluded the important, the biggest one, free trade agreement, which includes also China. So RCEP and CAI showed that allies of the US can be, to some extent, separated from the United States. When it comes to the economic and legal issues, as I mentioned, there is a lot of them, but I will focus only on several ones. In our opinion, the market access commitments are mostly recycled. To somehow it were implemented in previous years, given the automotive industry, when the BMW or Tesla were given the 100% ownership of their plants if they exceed some threshold of investments. Also in financial services, in recent years, the barriers for the foreign investors were lifted. It all concerns the negative lists of the investment sectors which were published in China in recent years. So we see that what is included in CAI is rather a consolidation of the decisions and reforms or openings which were already made by China for the investors from all over the world. Having said that, there are some new areas which were could be wider open for the EU investors. One of the most prominent is the healthcare industry in 8 big giant Chinese cities, and in Hainan Island, the EU investors could have been involved in the investments in healthcare services. Also in research and development, with exclusion of, for instance, human sciences, but also in digital consulting services or cloud services. There are also provisions regarding the subsidies, which is one of the most sticking points in the EU-China relations, but provisions in CAI are limited only to the services subsidies. So the manufacturing subsidies, which is the most prominent problem when it concerns subsidies in EU-China relations, are not touched. And mostly those subsidies should be more, the aim is to make them more transparent. There is also a broader definition of state-owned enterprises, which consists, for instance, companies with minority share of the state, or also the companies which are run by the provincial authorities. There is also a prohibition of forced technology transfer. It's a similar one, a little bit even expanded, that in the phase 1 trade agreement between the US and China. And there is also important part from the EU point of view on sustainability. This chapter consists on the commitments on climate change or labor standards. In fact, this chapter repeats China's existing international obligations, for instance, regarding the Paris Climate Agreement, or they are quite weak and non-binding, mostly because there should be only recommendations on the implementation of those commitments, not the strict judicial enforcement of those commitments. What is important, CAI hasn't touched the internal China's regulations concerning, for instance, security, like cybersecurity, state security law, counterterrorism law, and social credit system. All of them can hamper the EU companies' investments activity in China, and quite frankly, they can be used to block almost every investment in China. It depends on the decision of the Chinese authorities. Regarding China's access to the EU market, it has been sustained, but it was already known that the agreement is asymmetrical in this regard, because EU market was quite widely open to the Chinese investment in the past. Of course, in some areas, the investment screening mechanism has been used, but in fact, the EU market was quite widely open for the Chinese investors. The aim was to open the Chinese market for the EU investors. There is one sector, the energy one, in which Chinese companies can be more present in the EU, but in fact, the most visible effect of CAI could be the sustained market access to the EU market for the Chinese entities. The third part, which is the effectiveness of the CAI, in our opinion, the crucial one. To enforce this agreement, if it will be ratified, will be very hard. The first thing is that dispute settlement mechanism is incoherent. There are, in fact, two dispute mechanisms that can be used given the text of the agreement, the one on the general issues and the one of the sustainable chapter. On the general issues, there is a way to make some consensus on the descriptions, on the provisions of the agreement, and to make them create a panel of arbitrary panel which can enforce some of those irregularities. On the sustainable chapter, which consists labor or climate change, as I mentioned, there could be only recommendations. So the enforceability of these provisions is very problematic. The second thing is there is a lack of investment protection section, the crucial one from the perspective of individual investors. The sides decided to give themselves the 2-year deadline since the signature of the agreement to negotiate this investment protection section. But in fact, there are not many incentives for this, for negotiating this and concluding this section, especially from the Chinese side. In that way, the lack of investment protection section, also only based on the state-to-state dispute, makes the potential EU investors more vulnerable to the EU's internal decisions and do not protect them properly. There are high-level consultations included in the agreement, which may prove to be beneficial to some extent. It also depends on the goodwill of the sides, but it will not make these provisions of the agreement enforceable. It will be a political decision rather than the judicial one. And the last thing in this part, which we in the report, there is quite a lot of place devoted to this issue, how China in the past tried to implement the international agreements, their commitments made on the international stage, and also given the local internal structural reforms which were announced in the past by Xi Jinping and other prominent politicians from China. There is a lack of many structural reforms. In fact, the market forces, as was mentioned by the Chinese authorities in recent years, which should play the decisive role in the economy. In fact, it's not taking place, and still the state and the authorities decide where the allocation of goods should go and what should be the the decision-making process in big part of the economy, which is also which one of the features is the strong position of state-owned enterprises, which is what is very important, and our guest can read about this more in our report, is how the economic agreements with other parties were respected by China. The best example is still the Australia and its free trade agreement with China. Last year, given the spats, the political spats on the COVID-19 pandemic breakout, and also the other issues of interfering with China in Australian politics, the tensions between Australia and China has arisen, and China violated the free trade agreement because of the political reasons as a leverage in the relations with Australia. That shows that the international commitments made by China and respecting them can be problematic. And also the mixed compliance with that WTO dispute ruling is also one of the arguments against the respecting of KAI by the Chinese side. Of course, every almost WTO member has its own record on WTO disputes, but China is one of the most active in this sphere, one of the most the countries against which the disputes were made, and the compliance with the disputes ruling is not satisfactory in our opinion. And in the end, some conclusions emerging from our report. The crucial thing is whether China can be a trusted partner to adjust to the legal framework of KAI. In our opinion, it could be problematic given, for instance, the record of the past, respecting the past international agreements. The timing of the conclusion of the agreement could be perceived as suboptimal. I mentioned about the relations with the US and also all those internal events in the Chinese politics and China's activity during COVID-19 pandemic. The investment protection section, I said that there is a 2-year timeline for negotiating this part, but even if there will be a separate agreement on this or included in the KAI as a different chapter, we think that it could be, EU companies could fear that using this mechanism could block their access to the Chinese market. So also the effectiveness could not be so high as we might think. Market access commitments, those which are implemented, they will be exploited mostly by the largest European enterprises. There is no separate chapter of small and medium enterprises, so mostly the big business will benefit from it. What is important, and we saw it at the end of last year, given, for instance, the Ant Group IPO blocking by the Chinese authorities, the increasing CCP grip on the economy can raise the unpredictability of doing business in China. So KAI could not be definite or the crucial instrument to make this climate better. It only depends on the decisions on the Chinese Communist Party and this on its path to the development, social and economic one. And before the ratification of KAI, if the EU would like to make some leverage, there should be some prerequisites. For instance, the ratification of ILO conventions. There is only now in the agreement that China will make efforts to ratify the conventions on forced labor, which is very weak provision and would not probably force China to do that. There could be also the pressure to change the national laws as a sign of goodwill. It was the element of the negotiations with Vietnam during the free trade agreement talks. And also we think that the strengthening of autonomous measures when KAI would not be effective or can be too weak is very important. It concerns the investment screening mechanism I mentioned earlier to make it more efficient, for instance, because of the information sharing, and also the strategic sectors which should be taken into account under this screening mechanism. That would be useful. Also, the tools again on for subsidies, human rights due diligence when it comes to trade and investment with China, but also with other partners, and anti-coercion instrument. The discussions on this are ongoing in the EU, and it also could be a tool for making a leverage of the EU in relations with China much stronger. And the last but not least, we think that also given the influence on transatlantic relations and EU credibility in the world, it could be welcomed that greater EU leverage on China could be achieved by the common position on economic issues, but not only. We saw in March on the sanctions on human rights that it's possible. This cooperation between like-minded countries, like-minded states, and the EU's allies. So also in the economic sphere, we think that it could give the EU's more leverage and could be more effective than acting on its own. So thank you for your attention, and I will now pass the floor to Mr. Reinhard Butikofer, who will host the discussion on the report and on the KAI in general with our guests, the members of the European Parliament, which will be a crucial part of the ratification process of the agreement. So, Mr. Butikofer, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vnukovsky. When I did reach out to Director Dembski from PISM to ask whether he might be willing to take on the challenge, I was very happy that he did. And seeing the results of this study, I'm just, first of all, trying to express my gratitude for all the intellectual effort that you put into this, Mr. Vnukovsky and all the others. I am, for those who don't know me, Mr. Dembski has done a little too much honor to me. I'm just the leader of the Greens in the AFET committee, and I'm also the chair of the China delegation of the European Parliament. And I'm being joined for this conversation with two very respected colleagues, not only, but certainly including on China. They both have been active in politics for a long time, very experienced. Mr. Winkler started getting involved in politics in 1991. Mrs. Fotyga started with Solidarność in 1981. They have both served as ministers in their national government. Ms. Fotyga, for instance, has served with the governments of Jerzy Buzek and also Lech Kaczynski. And they have now senior status as prominent members of the European Parliament, where Mrs. Fotyga is the spokesperson for her political group in the Foreign Relations Committee, and Mr. Winkler is the standing rapporteur on China in the Trade Committee, and also the chair of the China Monitoring Group. There would be much more to be said about their long and illustrious careers, but I cut it short to get to the conversation. First of all, I will invite Mrs. Fotyga and Mr. Winkler to make a few initial remarks, and then we will come back to a conversation. And for this part of our webinar, everybody who is on the call would be invited to join in. You can send questions or remarks via the chat, or I think there's also there's a Q&A section also. So please don't hesitate to join us. But now we first hear from our two experts. Mrs. Fotyga, Jörg Wuttke, a very good friend of mine who serves as the European Union Chamber of Commerce president in China, has said that he's in favor of CAI, even though he thinks it just offers a few baby steps. What is your assessment, please?
Thank you, Mr. Butikofer. Thank you for inviting me to this excellent initiative. I'm naturally, being Polish, I'm proud of the work of both distinguished institutes. I've read this report meticulously, and I congratulate findings, although I have several questions, but probably it's not proper time now to ask. Allow me to strike at the very beginning quite hard security note. I belong to the region that is very transatlantic in all colors of, or almost all colors of political scene, and we rely on the US as very important ally, and this role surely is to be maintained by US preserving the leading economic role and maintaining country's technological edge. I think that rivalry between US and China now starts to be quite tense, and from my point of view, in order to be able to project power, for example, to our region, in order to successfully deter the main challenge we have now, namely from Russian Federation, means keeping the leading role of US. Actually, Biden winning the presidential elections promised closer relationship with the EU, and unfortunately, the pace and wave of concluding negotiations shows actually deep distrust of European leaders vis-a-vis US, regardless to administration and regardless to earlier manifestations. There are also some issues referring to the current model of PRC relationship, trade and investment relationship with the world. It is predominantly country-based or country-focused, and PRC looks at partners through political lens, exerting huge pressure every time on actually any partner to behave in a proper way. What is proper way? It is to be elaborated, of course. There is CAI, but we have also the example of, for example, basic law signed between UK and PRC on Hong Kong, and what happens in Hong Kong now is well known. We have also the trade agreement between PRC and Australia that was mentioned in the report, and both have been undermined when and where it was convenient to PRC. There is also the policy of one country, two systems, and current pressure and build up against Taiwan shows that this principle that we were used to repeating as mantra is just nothing when it comes to interest. We have ILO issues and forced labor. It is not only this, of course, because what happens in Xinjiang province we call and very serious political elites call it genocide. That is much more serious than just forced labor. It is one manifestation of a very, very bad issue. And secondly, there is disparity between a variety of EU member states in benefiting from a relationship with China. Usually my region has been named, but actually when we see this graph presented within the report, there is Germany, France, Italy, Netherlands. The most active of countries of our region, Hungary, is somehow at the very end of those profiting from trade, and other countries of the region are simply almost non-existent. Yes, true, it was also an equality in investment between EU countries, European countries, and PRC. Surely mechanisms within CAI are not to change most probably this issue, because as I say, provisions within the issue, the CAI are enable China to keep the decisive position on the nature, way, and pattern of relationship. So I'm rather negative about CAI. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Fotyga. And I would now invite Julio Winkler to add his comments before we enter the conversation. Please, Julio.
Reinhard, thank you very much. And also I would like to thank for the invitation and for being able to participate directly to this very interesting presentation. I also say hello to all the participants on YouTube and on Zoom and on other channels of communication. I would like to recall, maybe it's not a breach of confidence, that before starting the official broadcast of this discussion, we were discussing about trust. And I think trust, or even the lack of trust, is a very important issue, because now the fact is that we have little trust. The European Union and China have little trust one to each other. But I would like to avoid speaking about the political context, because our colleague Anna Fotyga did an extensive political analysis. So I would maybe just say a few ideas about the content of the CAI. And I would like to start from the presentation of PISM director Sławomir Dębski. If I noted correctly, he said that basically there are two rationales for CAI, rebalancing an asymmetric relationship between the European Union and China, and also replacing the bilateral investment treaties which are existing as we speak today between EU member states and China. And let me start with the second topic. Maybe it's not so widely known. I'm not exactly aware if we have a public of experts or also a more diverse interested public, but there are 26 out of the 27 EU member states which have currently bilateral investment treaties in force with China. All of those bilateral investment treaties, of course, they are built on the ISDS, Investor to State Dispute Settlement Mechanism, which is already considered obsolete, and it's not considered anymore by the European Union. Also, if we discuss, as we do, and I myself do discuss very often with the EUCCC, the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China, and its very experienced president, Jörg Wütke, who you, Reinhard, have already mentioned, we have to learn that never it was the case for any of the European companies to use ISDS. And this is, of course, coming from political reasons. I will not elaborate. So this is a strong rationale for having a replacement for those 26 bilateral investment treaties, which are indeed one of the elements that impeach the European Union in speaking with one voice. Then also the other introductory remark of our PISM director, Mr. Debski, was about rebalancing asymmetry. And I would say, yes, it's a double asymmetry that we have today. First of all, we have an open market of the European Union, and we have an opaque and closed or very difficultly penetratable Chinese market. So we need market access. That was one of the main elements of the negotiating mandate of the European Commission. Also, we speak a lot about competitive neutrality, but again, if you ask the EUCCC, you will find out that competitive neutrality is unfortunately most often a talking point and remains very far from realities on the ground in China. But there is also a second type of asymmetry that has to be corrected. And as we speak today, dear colleagues and dear participants, you have to acknowledge that the European Union is the only major global economic or trade player with no rules-based engagement with China. The United States have since more than 1 year the Phase 1 agreement. You have mentioned in your presentation RCEP, so the other Pacific countries have the RCEP, which is including 1/3 of global population and 1/3 of global GDP, if we speak in big numbers. So yes, you have mentioned Australia, but we have to mention also Japan and New Zealand and Singapore and Vietnam. So there are several players with bilateral either FTAs or other types of global agreements. The European Union has none, and this also has to be corrected. And finally, just to finish on this line, the European Union is about rules-based engagement. The European Union is, I think, a basic member in the WTO, which gives us the rules-based global trading system. We are fighting to revive the WTO, which unfortunately, as we know very well, is in not very good shape today. So our aim should be the rules-based engagement. My question stands, and Reinhard, you will forgive me if I don't give you my opinion on CAI, because you have mentioned that I'm the standing rapporteur for CAI in the European Parliament. So I want really to play very neutrally in this game. But just to finish, I would say the European Union needs rules-based engagement with China. We need to fix some of the Chinese commitments. We need to fix issues in international law, not to depend on national law and interpretation of the Chinese side. We need all these things and many others. I don't want to prolong my initial intervention, but the question stands, if not CAI, then what else? Of course, today in the European Parliament, until we are under, and I will be very clear on this, until we are on these unfair and unacceptable sanctions of the Chinese side, today in the European Parliament, I think we don't have CAI on the agenda. And we will not have it until the situation is as it is today. But the question remains, how to bring our Chinese partners, competitors, and rivals into a rules-based relationship? Thank you.
Thank you also very much, Julio Winkler. We have about 20 minutes for the conversation. And first of all, I want to say that somebody asked for the full text of the report. It has been shared in the chat, and you can also find it when you go to my Twitter account @Büti. I published it there. And of course, I would also think it might make sense if Mr. Vnukovsky and Director Dembski would want to join the conversation. But as so far, I have not seen any questions in the chat. I will pose questions myself to my two colleagues. Let me start by underscoring what you just said, Julio. We need a rules-based agreement with China. The question is this it? And in that context, obviously, there are different ways of looking at the deal. The political implications are not analyzed as very favorable in the report, and Mrs. Fotyga has underlined that, and I would side with that kind of take. The economic and legal issues obviously offer more of a mixed picture. And there I want to ask one question to both Mrs. Fotyga and Mr. Winkler. Obviously, whatever we have in the text of an agreement, the really sticking issue is whether it will be enforced. There have been question marks raised in the report about enforcement of the deal. Also, the situation with Australia has been mentioned. So, question first round, and then there will be more questions from the chat. But do you think that the provisions in the deal are good enough to rely on enforcement of the deal if it would ever be ratified? This time we take the different order, and I will ask Julio Winkler to respond first, please.
Reinhard, thank you. So first of all, I would make an introduction just to acknowledge. Now, can you hear me? Okay, thank you very much. So first of all, I would like to acknowledge the fact that we have this PISM study in a very timely period, because indeed this the topic of EU-China relations in general, but the topic of CAI also in particular is very timely, and it's very important. But also I have to acknowledge that we have several other important studies which came out in the last weeks, maybe just to mention the Bruegel Institute study, but also to mention the German SWP, the German Institute for International Security Affairs. Maybe there is not a real harmony among the conclusions of various studies. And I think that this is just only natural. Different viewpoints bring us to different conclusions, as different analyses can bring us to different conclusions. So the problem is Europe equipped to take the best decision? And I would say yes, because controversy inside the European Parliament, different viewpoints inside different think tanks in Europe, also differences, maybe even as you have hinted, and Mr. Vnukovsky also has hinted about the special interest of some member states. So to respond to your question, I need maybe one, or maybe maximum of 2 minutes, Reinhard, if you can give me 2 minutes. And I will use 1 minute just to reveal the fact that it's not only about direct beneficiaries for the CAI if it will be ratified in any time, because Eastern European countries are having all of them, if I know very well, as first commercial partners, the big economies in Europe. It's about Germany, it's about France, it's about Italy. My country has 27 of Romania. So I'm speaking of Romania, 27% of our international foreign trade goes to extra EU destinations, and 73% of our trade goes to intra-EU destinations. And our first commercial partner is Germany, speaking about technology, speaking about exports, speaking about manufacturing. So when I say, is it an eventual EU-China investment agreement, is it important for Romania? If you look, and for other Eastern European countries, if you analyze only the direct numbers of trade between various member states and China, you would say, oh no, because those are small numbers. But if you take into consideration the indirect effects, then you would see that there is really huge importance attached to this relationship. Now, is it enforceable? Of course, if you take for the examples in the last 1.5 or 2 years, you would say nothing is enforceable about China, because look, they did not respect the FTA with Australia, but also they did not realize the numbers they committed to, the volumes of trade they committed to in phase 1 US-China phase 1 deal. But let's just remember, we have been in a full-fledged trade war in 2020. We have the COVID effects and so on. So it's, of course, very difficult to have a pre-judgment about, no, they will never respect. As it is difficult to say, oh yes, but they will respect. And the mechanism which you analyzed it, Mr. Vnukovsky, as a political mechanism, I would tell you that this is the only kind of mechanism that is working with China. I mean, if you don't have a political mechanism to enforce decisions, then probably the enforcement could not happen at a very low technical level. You have to have high-level enforcement. So I think that this issue is open. I don't want to be overly optimistic because I don't have the grounds to be optimistic. But I also think that being overly pessimistic or saying, no, nothing is possible, that would be also an attitude I would reject.
Thank you, Julio. Mrs. Fotyga, your take, please.
Mr. Winkler, my educational background is foreign trade, and I'm very well aware about the nature of our intra-EU and extra-EU relationship and interests related to this. And when I speak about CAI, I try to find proper balance. I do not say that engagement with PRC in trade, investment engagement should be put aside because of the system there, although I'm very cautious and very reluctant. What I want to say is, and exactly I would like to refer to 26 existing bilateral agreements among EU member states and PRC, because obviously we started negotiating mandate was 2013. We waited many years to conclude this, and actually we should have waited until proper dispute-solving mechanism is included in CAI and some other things. My point is that exactly we concluded this hastily without looking properly into legal and economic aspects of this agreement that protects the rights and interests of EU member states or some EU member states properly. Actually, I wanted to ask in particular the Polish Economic Institute experts and legal experts about, is there different level of or do mechanisms, dispute solving mechanism within each BTT differ currently? I do not think we have proper mechanism forcing PRC to sit to the table as was provided here in 2 years' time, because developments, political developments are really difficult now and the pace is huge. So I'm not thinking I do not think we have proper position to enforce this. You are right, we need a unified mechanism, but there is none in this agreement. There are other issues as well. As I say, I'm generally speaking for global trade and economic relationship, but we have to know the nature of countries that force their political position on their economic partners. I wouldn't mention debt trap that is so popular nowadays in engagement of PRC with individual partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Fotyga. There's now time for 1 second round of questions and answers before we have to conclude, and I will paraphrase the questions that have been raised in the chat. One question is this: understanding that China has already, in a way, achieved a certain geopolitical victory by convincing the EU to conclude the negotiations at this point in time, do you even expect that they will push hard for ratification, or is that something that they might not even pursue that energetically? Second question, do you think that we have to watch out for pressure on members of the European Parliament or member states and monitor how China will try to apply pressure to get the ratification? That's, so to speak, the other side of the coin. And one question is, what are the real main benefits of the deal, assuming it would be ratified, for European companies, and why would those benefits outweigh the political downsides of the deal? And then there is a last question. What is the alternative to CAI in case it would not be ratified? What is the alternative to CAI in politically viable, and how much time and political capital would this take? And then there's a question that goes to me about the future role of the German Greens in this context. I will pick that up after the round of answers. I would now go back to Mrs. Fotyga, and as we have not very much time left, I would say pick the questions that you like best, and you have about 4 minutes, please.
I'm not quite sure in short run PRC is going to push on ratification of CAI. I think that political goal in actually undermining credibility of the, let's say, political West in keeping as much united as possible was already to some extent, or has been already to some extent achieved. Actually, in face of external threats from both Russian Federation and also very tense situation in Southeast China Sea, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Tibet, and so on, we have to keep unity. I think that we still have possibility to do this. We need deep discussion, but actually pushing things, pushing economic interests against reservations of partners, allies is extremely bad pattern, and actually we have to avoid this. I think that it is absolutely necessary to engage in consultation, deeper transatlantic consultation. I do not preclude trade, investment, engagement with China. We are in global world, it is necessary. But yes, China currently is able to exert enormous pressure on political elites, individual politicians. We have numerous examples of this, and we have to keep united. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, Mr. Winkler, your points.
Thank you very much. I tried to note the questions. They were several. First of all, about I would argue with this idea that China has a geopolitical victory over the European Union by the political conclusion of CAI. I would, and if we look back a little bit, I think this is an idea which was maybe much discussed in January, in February, but we are now, after some months of discussion and analysis, not only of CAI, but also of wider EU-China relation. We are confronted with some political realities in China, internal political realities in China. So I would say, I don't know if this was a geopolitical victory. I would say no. Then it was the question about China applying pressure on us, members of the parliament, to obtain ratification. Well, I cannot witness any such pressure, at least regarding my person. I would say, on the contrary, pressure is applied on me by the opponents of CAI to not contribute to the ratification of CAI. So I would say the case is the contrary. Then about the benefits for European Union companies, I think, first of all, there is not enough time to respond. This is a very technical and very broad question, but I would just remind you that when the issue of sanctions appeared, I was the one consulting, of course, with shadow rapporteurs to suspend the meeting that was that had the destination exactly to discuss with companies, with EU-CCC and other industry representatives from the European Union, to discuss the benefits and to find out the position of the EU companies. And as I said, until the situation is as it is, I am open to discuss broader EU-China relations in the European Parliament officially, but I don't know. I have to consult the shadow rapporteurs. I have to consult the political groups to find out what would be the best way to proceed. But we are now in a very difficult situation. And finally, it was a question about the alternatives of the CAI. Well, I don't know. I am prepared to draw your attention on the complements to CAI more easily. Just think of the last week, just think of our discussion, EU-China discussion on COP26 and on Paris Climate Agreement and on climate change objectives. Think of the fact that in the same time, the United States had the same discussion by its High Representative for Climate Change with Chinese leadership. And I would say that we have so many things to discuss. We have so many objectives that cannot be obtained apart, only in a sort of cooperation, even if it's in the conditions of rivalry, even if it's in the condition of competition. We need engagement, because at the end of the day, our scope, our objective is to sit at the same table in a rules-based relationship with China. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me make a few remarks from my side to conclude this conversation. First of all, I want to thank both my colleagues for their valuable contributions. Then a question has been asked to me whether a possible role for the German Greens in the German government after September might have an implication for ratifying CAI. Well, I would say that the main battle over CAI will be fought in the European Parliament. And there, so far, nobody, as far as I know, has ever said, we will not ratify whatever the conditions are. A few colleagues have indicated, like my good friend Michael Gahler from EPP, have indicated that they want to ratify, definitely, but others have withheld their judgment and have pointed out that maybe we should focus more on some issues that might play a role in this context. And I would side with those. For instance, as has been mentioned in the report, there is a widely shared demand in the European Parliament that China ratify ILO core conventions against the use of forced labor. Not everybody uses exactly the same language, but Mr. Winkler and Mr. Lange, the chair of INTA, have written to the Chinese ambassador in Brussels that they insist, just like everybody else, on real steps in that regard. Secondly, there has been a conversation, an interesting conversation in INTA, the trade committee, about Europe's autonomous measures. And when we realize that CAI does not address quite a number of issues, like the procurement market is not addressed at all, maybe it would be a good reordering of our priorities, not to think about CAI first, but to think about creating reciprocity in the procurement market first. So having a conscientious and effective effort to create the international procurement instrument, or to put in place the human rights due diligence mechanism that the Commission is working on, or to create, similar to the United States Congress, a ban on the importation of products of forced labor, or to develop anti-subsidy measures on the basis of the white paper that the Commission published last June, or to improve the investment screening mechanisms. I think if we put those issues as priorities, that's what would certainly help all our businesses in their efforts to move beyond the tilted relationship, the unbalanced relationship that we have now. And as regards the role of the Greens, look, we shouldn't jump to conclusions. We've just presented our candidate for the chancellorship today. Nobody knows whether we will be in government. We'll fight hard for that. But what I can tell you is that my party, by and large, shares my critical attitude towards CAI. With that, let me finish and thank Mrs. Fotyga and Mr. Winkler again, and turn it back over to Director Dembski.
Thank you very much. I would like to express, on behalf of the audience, our gratitude for your time and contribution to this debate. I would like to encourage all our followers, readers, viewers to actually read our report. That's one of possible contributions to the overall debate in Europe about both this particular investment deal, but also about wider questions concerning where Europe should go, how Europe should shape its relationship vis-à-vis China, what kind of benchmarks we should keep in force, just for good of our citizens, just for good of our business and prosperity for the whole continent. With this idea in mind, I believe an idea which we all of us share very much. I would like to thank all our viewers and contributors to this debate for their time and their thoughts. And I'm looking forward for further cooperation of all intellectual centers in Europe with the European Parliament. Thank you very much for your time and devotion to this cooperation.